Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer. Today it is once again just me, and as promised, we have a second episode of this week in mid to late May. I don't know what you would say, but I guess it'd be mid to late May, the week of the 17th. So yes, we have two episodes this week. Got a lot to talk about today. And some of the things it's just like basic ideas I want to stress to the people. So we'll have that, and as always, the secret project that I've been working on to get more episodes to you guys should be announced at the end of this episode, so keep you posted on that. So the first topic I want to talk about today is something very basic. I mean, we always talk about critical race theory. It's become a mainstream term. You always hear about it on Fox News, see it talked about in the New York Post. Parents are, organizing against it. Lots of debate going on over critical race theory. But, I think one of the things I'm noticing is that people have a tough time of defining what critical race theory is. And this gives the left the opportunity to, undermine a lot of people's talking points by saying, well, that's not critical race theory. And I got this idea from reading this terrible article by, well, it's not necessarily the article was terrible, but the person who wrote it is terrible, Kathy Young, who's this, I guess an intellectual dark web type person, or what would have been called a cultural libertarian. She's pretty awful. And she's like, I'm a free speech warrior. And she's some like 60-year-old hag spinster who always attacks anyone with any type of, who've been accused of racism. Like, she'll attack me as like, this guy calls himself highly respected. And it's like, I don't think he's respected. And she's like, looks like a witch from a cartoon or something, and she's 60-year-old and spinster, and her main concerns are like defending like the most least important like free speech issues, and this is what her life centers around. And yes, but anyway, she like, not necessarily intentionally, but she did have an interesting article about critical race theory, and like, she's talking about how, these people who are attacking critical race theory, people like James Lindsay, if you guys probably know James Lindsay. He's the guy, I guess he was like a math researcher who's now become like the chief expert on wokeness and critical race theory. And he has, his Twitter account's full of a lot of cringe. I mean, sometimes he does good stuff, but generally he's wacky, but people really like him for some reason. Anyway, and people like Kathy Young really don't like him, but he's always talking about critical race theory. And when they're talking about this, they want to say, well, what they're talking about isn't necessarily, those aren't critical race theories. Those are just like Antifa, or that's Black Lives Matter. And there's like a serious set of critical race theory that we need to talk about in an academic discipline. And, this point is true to an extent. It's like, yeah, if you're talking about what critical race theory is, like by the specific textbook definition of it, then yeah, but a lot of people talk about it as critical race theory is not. But really what it's being used for is a synonym for anti-white racism. And people don't necessarily want to say anti-white racism because they're like, oh, we'll come off as kook. We'll just say critical race theory. But a lot of conservatives are now, embracing the term critical race theory. Wouldn't it be much easier to call it directly what it is? It's anti-white racism. And this was the same problem that they had when conservatives popularized the term intersectionality. And now people like Kathy Young and these like, oh, I'm an enlightened centrist types and libertarian love the term intersectionality. They don't necessarily like the term critical race theory. I think it may be because of people like D-class people like James Lindsay and others talk about it way too much. But, it's the same point there with intersectionality. It's like, oh, it's this like obscure academic theory that we're going to talk about, and this is what defines the left. And it's like, no, there's a simple way to describe this. This is just anti-white racism. And it was the same with intersectionality. It's like, oh, all these groups of minorities and oppressed people are intertwined together and, stuff. Oh, what intertwines them together? It's like, oh, it's intersectionality. No, it's anti-white racism. And it's the same with critical race theory. You don't have to worry about whether it's the textbook definition or if this specifically describes people who describe themselves as critical race theorists. Just call them anti-white racists. This is what motivates the left. This is what unites them all. This is what animates Black Lives Matter and Antifa. And now even what we're seeing with a lot of these pro-Palestinian protesters, it's all anti-white racism. And this is like the defining trait of it, is that they all define themselves as not being a part of the white mainstream, the white majority. And this is what gives them their identity. So, you know, there's no need for the term necessarily with critical race theory and intersectionality. And even in my book, when I, published No Canvas for White Men, or really wrote it, the term intersectionality wasn't being used that much in 2016. They were using, they were still using like cringe phrases like safe space, snowflake. And this is like, and many of the conservatives were still arguing that these are just coddled kids and their helicopter parents are flying around and they just can't take, any harmful ideas that they disagree with. And this was still the mentality I was arguing with. And as I argued in my book, it was anti-white racism. This is what defined them. I didn't use intersectionality, but I remember in like 2017 and 2018, this term took off, which, it's a way of like obscuring what the hell it is. And like people are like, this is all about intersectionality, but it's like, no, there's no need to complicate the matter. But I think people complicate the matter because they're worried about saying anti-white racism, that they'll be, called racist themselves. They'll be attacked as a white nationalist, and you can't say the term white, and anti-white racism doesn't exist. They're worried about that. So they use these, terms that they pluck from academia. They use academia's terms themselves. And then they like extrapolate it and expand it and assign it to all these things that are not necessarily critical race theory. Like I doubt like the average black person who's, marching with Black Lives Matter and looting has any idea what the hell critical race theory is. I don't even know if they could tell you what theory is, but like the word itself. But they want to describe it as like, oh, they're inspired by Marxist ideals. I'm like, no, I think they're just inspired by anti-white racism. And a lot of people muddy the waters with this. It's like Christopher Rufo, who does a lot of good work, a lot of great work actually in exposing, anti-white racism in schools and in government agencies and through their training, etc. He does incredible work with that. But whenever I read these articles, he tries to put like these, his own philosophical theories about it. And he wrote a long piece for the New York Post, I think it was a couple weeks ago, about critical race theory, and like there was like 1,000 words dedicated to Marxism and like the Frankfurt School and how they built this out. And I was like, I don't I don't think Marcuse and Adorno are responsible for these like really uneducated like Black Lives Matter organizers going out and be like, I'm owed something by Whitey, and I don't think they need to like some academic jargon to explain this. I don't necessarily, even with the arguments with the Marxism stuff, it's like people are bringing it back. Now, necessarily, I don't want to just, say it's the worst thing in the world that they're bringing back Marxism, because this does give them the ammunition to attack Black Lives Matter and Antifa and all these other harmful left-wing movements. So it's not necessarily bad that they're using the Marxist rhetoric, but they're not necessarily Marxists anymore. I mean, and even people are like, well, they're cultural Marxists. They're not necessarily tearing down the economic structure. They're just using it with the culture. And it's like, and then they bring up like Frankfurt School and all these things that none of these people that were accusing of being cultural Marxists or Marxists have even read. I think Steve Saylor in points to Christopher Rufo. Rufo on Twitter was defending his theory as like saying, critical race theory is Marxism and BLM is Marxism. And he was like defending that. And Steve Saylor's like, these people actually accept capitalism. They just really want a handout. They support like a racial quota, affirmative action capitalism, where they're given all these benefits, but like the economic structure stays the same. And, they could say, well, now it's like the cultural structure and stuff. But I mean, cultural Marxism works as an epithet, but it doesn't actually define a real ideology or what a real philosophical theory this is. It's a useful epithet. I don't want to dismiss people using it to call people like cultural Marxists. Like I think it has a certain power in itself, but people who want to like trace its origins to this obscure German academic school that then they went over to America, and some of these people had some minor influence, but Marcuse and such, but none of these people are reading Horkheimer, Adorno, or Marcuse, or any of these other people associated with the Frankfurt School. And some of the ideas, it's like a weird tangent. Like conservatives are obsessed with thinking that all of these things have like their roots in some philosopher our ideologue, and we have to really trace it to the source. And like people on the ground are really debating these ideas and theories, and that's not really what's happening. Most people aren't reading anything, and they're not really, and they're being informed by like phrases and history and culture in itself. And not necessarily these things are informed by these philosophical schools that we people argue about. It's the same with like we went over this in a podcast a few weeks ago with Nightmare Vision, talking about the quote unquote new right. I prefer calling them populist Inc. And their obsession with talking about ideas of like eliminating John Locke, and how like they're thinking that all these ordinary Americans are discussing this topics is like a too much of an obsession on that, and rather than focusing on social and cultural forces and even economic forces that are driving a lot of what's happening that we're seeing throughout the world. And it really does muddy the waters in terms like things that it should be simple and should really give people a good insight into what's happening is like non-whites are all joining forces against whitey. That's something very simple, not very complicated to matter. And then they, muddy the waters and they make it obscure. And like, it's like, oh, it's like Marxism and it's infecting people's minds. And then it gives the impression that the real thing we have to worry about is white Marxist. And like, it's, these poor little POC or don't really know what they're getting into. They're getting infected by Marxism. I saw a thread last night from this Breitbart writer, John Hayward, about, and it's like a 30-40 tweet thread about how Marxism is a virus and conservatives were wrong to see it as on the ash heap of history. And it's like, really it is on the ash heap of history. I mean, I think people going into communism and Marxism, it's just like a posturing. I don't even think really the left is, it's not the motivating force. It is just the simplicity of this resentment towards white people that's the motivating factor. And I think a lot of the proponents, a lot of these people are doing good work. I don't necessarily want to, critique too hard of people who are attacking critical race theory. And it is an organizing idea for a lot of these ordinary parents to, demand that their schools not teach harmful ideas to their kids. So that's all good. I don't necessarily want to, be like, well, that's not the proper term, or please use anti-white racism, be like, actually. So I don't necessarily want to dampen that, but I think with a lot of the people who know better, these publicists and journalists and writers and thinkers who, keep using the term critical race theory, it's like, it's anti-white racism, and this is just so simple. Don't need to go with like a whole backstory of like the history of Marxism and like these academic cliques and everything like that. Just call it anti-white racism. And it's not, and I've talked about this before, it's not necessarily rooted in these crazy Marxist academics. It's really rooted in the way our country has been developing since the New Deal. A lot of this stuff that we see now, were things that were being promoted by people associated with the New Deal and going on forward through Cold War liberalism and et cetera. And in the civil rights movement, we could see the same rhetoric in the civil rights movement. And I think it's much better to use a simple phrase like anti-white racism because it connects it with this longer continuity of the left in America and how it's developed throughout America and the West. And how, it's not, an aberration. It's not a Marxist infiltration. This is like something that is an evolution of the liberalism we saw rooted in the New Deal and that developed throughout in the Cold War and is now gestating into its ugliest visage that we see now. And I don't want to, necessarily say, oh, it's Marxism. Black Lives Matter and all these groups support capitalism. I mean, the Black Lives Matter founder who has like $1 million homes, like this person's not going to undermine the economic system. And that's the final point I want to say is that a lot of conservatives are now trying to argue that, like one of the worst things about the critical race theory is that it's anti-capitalist. I'm like, no, it's anti-white. That's like really what's bad about it. And that's another thing about using this distraction is like bringing up the Marxism thing. It then turns this thing that's clearly a racial movement and racial hatred and then misdirecting it towards like traditional conservative boogeyman of anti-capitalism and such. It's not. It's a racial grievance movement, and it's compatible to capitalism. That's why every corporation endorses it. That's why every institution of our government endorses it. It doesn't threaten the system. It's something that has developed from the system that we've had in place since, FDR. And I think that's something that people need to keep in mind. It's not necessarily a Marxist infiltration. So those are my concluding remarks on that. And now I've got to go into a bunch of different topics. A lot of these will probably be 10-minute rants, but there's just a lot to talk about. This next topic is actually perfect with the last thing I just talked about. And talking about how, quote unquote critical race theory and all these things are actually compatible with American global liberalism that we're experiencing today. And what's been evolved from the Cold War liberalism of the past is this hilarious rant that MSNBC host Joe Scarborough delivered this morning about Trump and the Republican Party and not respecting democracy. And it was a throwback to, the 2002, 2003, when people like Joe Scarborough were calling people unpatriotic for not supporting the Iraq war and foreign interventions. And they were saying you better love the flag or get the hell out of this country. And Joe Scarborough himself basically did that. He went on this angry recital. He's like, you know what? Love it or leave it. And then he's getting so mad and hyped up about how these people question our democracy, are Madisonian constructs. And then he promises that he's like, there's millions of immigrants waiting to take your spot, and you just get the hell out of our country. If you don't respect our flag, if you don't respect our democracy, then get the hell out. And when his idea of America and democracy is the same as Black Lives Matter protesters. It's like Nancy Pelosi and all these horrible liberals, guiding the country. It's the CIA, it's the Pentagon raising a gay pride flag. That's his America. That's our system. That's our democracy. And you better accept it or you can get the hell out of America. And, we're now seeing this rhetoric that we would have associated with George W. Bush and jingoism of the early 2000s about how we're going to kick your ass. It's the American way. The Toby Keith song. But now it's like the Toby Keith song about how we're going to kick your ass. It's the American way. If you don't respect LGBTQ plus rights, if you don't believe that Black Lives Matter here, if you don't believe that hate has no home here and put that little sign out, then you can get the hell out of my country. And this is how jingoism and American patriotism is being weaponized against the right now. We are the unpatriotic traitors, and the real patriots are, Antifa, and you may say they claimed that Antifa were the natural heirs to the guys who stormed D-Day. These are the real American heroes, and the anti-American traitors are the people, waving American flags at protests for Trump and saying, stop the steal. Those are the real threats to our country. And this is the, mock, macho, belligerent rant delivered by Scarborough, who's one of the most odious people on the planet. I have always hated Morning Joe and Mika Brzezinski. And when they always talk about how their values and morals, and they always attack Trump for his infidelity. And I'm like, you two fuckers cheated on your respective spouses, divorced them, and then married each other. And then you have the audacity to complain about morals and values. You're living in your whole marriage is based on infidelity. That's how you guys originated. But they don't, it doesn't matter to them. They can get away with that. But these are the type of people who will lecture us. And, their America is, perfectly aligned with, the far left forces that we see. I mean, none of these, they're the ones who are going to respect, people like Kristen Clark, the DOJ nominee who believes that blacks have genetic superiority over whites and that cops are evil racists. That's being America. And now she's a member of the DOJ. So that's now the American system. And that's now our system of government. And that's now the people we need to respect and salute and thank them for their service, because she's a public servant. And they will accept anti-white racism, and I think even Scarborough has gone on rants about white privilege and the evils of systemic racism and how America's white supremacist past. And even now we have our UN ambassador as a black woman, her name escapes me at the moment, who's going on and lecturing the world about how America was built on white supremacy. Our Constitution, our Declaration of Independence are formed by white supremacy. And this is a hallmark of America. And now that's like a hallmark of patriotism. If you don't acknowledge that we live in a evil white supremacist country that was founded by evil white supremacists, then you can get the hell out of here, because you need to acknowledge that. Now, that could be unintentionally based in some respects, because we would even say, like, well, yeah, we were founded by racists who acknowledged that, the citizenship should be relegated to free white persons of good character. Yeah, we will. Okay, sure. Yeah, we'll say that, but we don't, necessarily call them evil. And they, as part of their mythology, it's about overcoming the stain and the sin that was embedded in with us at the founding. And so that's like patriotism, is that we're overcoming this. Like, yes, Thomas Jefferson was an evil white supremacist, but when he wrote that all men are created equal, that was good. And that's what we need to acknowledge. And now that's embedded and embraced and further advanced by people like Stacey Abrams. And that's the Joe Scarborough way of thinking. And so this is somebody, who in his past was a conservative Republican, and even probably, 10, 15 years ago, he would have probably been considered fairly conservative. And he still has like a conservative style and tone and rhetoric to him. And several other never Trumpers are like this, people like Bill Kristol, etc. They've all come to embrace this, patriotic version of what is essentially the same as Black Lives Matter. It's like our country is built on, or the purpose of our country is to spread racial egalitarianism and social justice and LGBTQ plus rights around the country. And you have like some big strong Marine who's like saluting, who's like, "Sir, yes, sir, we will fight for LGBTQ plus rights in Ukraine." And that's like their ideal American, who's like, they think it's like the ideal G.I. Joe, like the guy, like Lieutenant Colonel Matthew Lohmeyer, the guy who criticized critical race theory. They want that guy as like as the face of the military, but at the same time, he is like waving a trans flag and he's got like a Black Lives Matter patch, and that's still what they view as America, and that's like now the American purpose. And so it's another way to like consider that this isn't necessarily like the leftism we're seeing and like a lot of the harmful movements we're seeing in Black Lives Matter and Antifa and some quote unquote critical race theory stuff, and Robin DiAngelo and Ibram X. Kennedy and all that. This isn't necessarily some Marxist intrusion. This is a natural part of our system that is global liberalism, and people like Bill Kristol and Joe Scarborough, David Frum now accept it and promote it, and they see that as the true America. And if you don't like it, you can get the hell out of their country. So that's something funny. You all should watch the rant. It's it's really funny and how cringe it is. But now we've got moving along to another subject of somebody who is actually one of the big proponents of the quote unquote critical race theory, but really, as we know, it's just anti-white racism. The 1619 Project curator, Nikole Hannah-Jones, has suffered a terrible atrocity. This is a real human rights crisis. She has been denied tenure at University of North Carolina. And I know listeners are going to be devastated by this news. This is terrible. I mean, this is a true threat to free speech and academic freedom in our country, and really just shows how reactionary right-wing fascists have taken over higher education. Yeah, of course I'm being facetious, but that's the actual response from the liberal media towards this really minor thing. And it's like, what happened with Nikole Hannah-Jones? She's supposed to get some cushy tenure spot. I mean, she doesn't have a PhD. I don't know what the hell she's going to be like teaching anti-white racism at the school. And the fact that she would get this job is a sign that anti-white racism is just totally embraced by universities. But UNC trustees were like, she's really controversial, and her whole project was based on historical inaccuracies and was like a lot of problems with it, and she's expressed a lot of insane views. And so maybe we don't want to have Nikole Hannah-Jones. And by the way, Nikole Hannah-Jones, as I like to point out, looks exactly like Pennywise the clown from the It movies, especially the original with the Tim Curry ones. Not necessarily so much the new one, but if you look at the pictures between Tim Curry's Pennywise and Nikole Hannah-Jones, the resemblance is uncanny, I just have to say. But, going back to what's happening with here in the with UNC is like, so the trustees are like, okay, maybe we don't want to get her tenure position. And she doesn't have academic credentials. She's mainly famous for something that promoted historical inaccuracies. And she's controversial. People really hate her. And taxpayers aren't going to like that we're paying this anti-white racist to spread anti-white racism at our school. Of course, they probably didn't even say that. But, that's a underlying thing in the back of their minds. We're not going to give her tenure. But the response to this is so insane. You are seeing mainstream writers at the Atlantic. There was some research. There was some professor, I think he was at Dartmouth, Brendan Nyhan. I think that's probably mispronouncing his name. Nyhan, however the hell you pronounce his name. And he was going as the politicization of universities is outrageous. How can we allow this to happen? This may be the very well end of press freedom, of academic freedom. Maybe press freedom too. They will even say that. And it's bro, everyone, there's all these tenured professors who are saying the exact same thing at Nikole Hannah-Jones. And they probably work at the University of North Carolina. There's nothing lost here by this one setback, but any setback that happens to the left, it creates such a dramatic outrage that you would think that they're on the brink of losing the whole country, but it's just one person not getting a sinecure. I think it's sinecure. Anyway, don't hold it to me how I'm pronouncing sinecure. Anyway, so she's not getting this, and they just lose their absolute minds. And it's once again what happened, and you get the tired arguments about, this left-wing cancel culture is out of control. Left-wing political correctness is this is cancel culture. What's happened to Nikole Hannah-Jones? Nikole Hannah-Jones has not lost anything. She's probably still making $500,000 a year just being, writing one article every 6 months. She's not doing anything. She's still well paid. She still has a huge platform. She still has an influence. She's not losing anything. It's just simply this university decided that it's not a wise idea to give her a tenure position for no reason at all, just to reward anti-white racism. So yeah, but they all lost their minds over it. And it's I've talked about this before, when they use cancel culture and stuff in the most asinine ways that they can be weaponized against the right, and here they're using it. And so there's been countless examples of professors who've lost their jobs, who've lost everything, who've been pushed out of their career paths, and nobody gives a shit. And they'll be well, they're denying their humanity. People's humanity. And we're even seeing a lot of outrage going on with some AP intern. She may have been a junior reporter. I forget if she was an AP intern or reporter. She made some anti-Israel comments on Twitter years ago, and she lost her job. And now all these people are oh wow, this is shows you can be blacklisted over that. I think that is kind of worrisome, but I mean, this person probably sucked, and I'm not going to cry over somebody at the Associated Press losing their job for being pro-Palestinian, and she's probably going to write a bunch of anti-white articles and support Black Lives Matter. Yeah, I don't care about it, but she does sympathize with a general left-wing cause, so you're supposed to sympathize with that, but you're supposed to ignore all the other people who have been blacklisted and excised from polite media. One of the person who I saw complaining about both of these cases was Adam Sturwer, who he is pro-Palestinian stuff is probably the most blacklisted item. And this guy has celebrated my docs all the time. And anytime somebody tweets out about me, I can see him in the replies being dude, this guy's a racist. Please look at this article, and this dude, if I told him what if it's saying that white people exist? I think that's a more blacklisted view, be that's not a real political opinion. That's denying people's humanity, and you deserve to be blacklisted. So all these people who support cancel culture and blacklisting, etc., get very upset when it happens to them, and then they recoil and they pretend that it's never happened to anyone else besides themselves. And this applies throughout the world, even when Another example, even though this is not from America, is that all these journalists were complaining about Alexei Navalny supporters getting fired from their government jobs. I'm not necessarily going to say that's the right thing to do, but here in America, that happens. If you supported Stop the Steal, or if you support the former president of the United States, you could very well lose your government job. Like there was a longtime police officer who's a police sergeant in Virginia who got fired merely for donating to Kyle Rittenhouse's bail fund, and that's like he's just participating in the democratic process. That's like you're allowed to help somebody with bail fund, no matter who you are. And this guy did it privately, anonymously, but it got leaked through a hack, and he lost his job, and so did several other people. And it's like, you're pretending that it's horrible what's happening to these Navalny supporters when the same fucking thing happens in America, and there's no capacity. And the person who tweeted this out, Julia Yaffe, who's a locale of a journalist who just like is a total idiot, never gets anything right, and somehow is like, I guess is like a product of nepotism. I don't know what she does for her life. She's sometimes well compensated, but she's like complaining about like, oh, the right wing's victim complex and thinking that this stuff happens here. It's like, yeah, it does happen here, and you guys support it. But when it happens, and like, it's always funny when they use these foreign examples. Like, I think one of the funnier examples was like reporters complaining about how Hong Kongers are going to lose their access to payment services due to their political beliefs. It's like, hello, that's been happening for many years here in America. It's happening, and it's happening in Europe. Like, as a highly respected guest, Martin Sellner, he's been denied by dozens, several banks. I don't want to say dozens, but denied access to a bank account by dozens of banks. Or I keep saying dozens, but several banks. And like this happens in the West, and it's like, what are you paying attention to? But like, oh, those people deny humanity. Those are the bad people that we need to like look out for. And you're like, okay. So why do we care what's happening in Russia to these Navalny supporters or these Hong Kong democracy protesters when like the same stuff is happening in America? And they use the same rhetoric. Like I'm sure the Chinese and Russians are saying like, oh, it's too dangerous to have somebody, a Navalny supporter. Like this person questions our democracy and believes in extremist beliefs, like we should deport Muslim immigrants, which Navalny believes. And they could use the same, they could just rip like arguments from American liberals and apply it to their own people. Like, oh, these Hong Kongers, we had a legitimate, freest and fairest election ever in Hong Kong, and these people question it. And we just can't let these people have bank accounts or jobs. And like people like, oh, yeah, sure. So all you really need to do is just like change like Trump supporter or right winger or white nationalist or far right extremist, whatever terms they're using, and just replace it with Navalny supporter and Hong Kong protester. And these people, and China and Russia would be set in their arguments. Like hey, we're just using the same argument you use. What's wrong with that? Like these people create a hostile work environment by just being there with their extremist views. We have to make sure that they don't have a job here. And like they're actually domestic terrorists. Like just use the terms they use here. And so, it's a lack of self-awareness, all regards, that are happening with this situation. So whenever liberals complain about this stuff, I think it's just better to laugh. And there are a few, the worst part is there are a few conservatives who are coming to Nikole Hannah-Jones' defense and like, oh, this is a threat to academic freedom. It's like, you don't, and some people are like even saying it's a basic threat to human rights. It's like, you are not obligated to have a nice sinecure from a university just because you're the black Pennywise and you wrote about a lot of anti-white racism. So it's no clear threat, but anytime there is like any type of setback to the left, they throw this huge temper tantrum. And I wouldn't be surprised if UNC backtracks. So the next topic I want to talk about, I'm running through. This is completely separate from whatever what I've previously talked about in the podcast. There was this, I read the worst article ever in the American Conservative this week. It's by one Emma Ayres, who is some Conservative Inc. functionary who's a woman, as you can tell. She wrote an article saying with the title, "Why Twitter Isn't Manly." The subheadline is, "Instead of dunking on stupid tweets, very online traditionalists should get around to actually starting families already." Okay, and I'm like, immediately open this up. I'm like, I'm going to hate this article. And sure enough, it really did it. There is some really bad lines in it. I want to read this one about Marshall McLuhan, who is famous, social commentator from Canada. And this is clearly like, I think this is really indicative of the piece. So she writes, it's a pity too, because the medium thwarts the conservative message. In fact, if only Marshall McLuhan were still around, he'd remind us that the medium is the message. He'd be right about that too. The medium is no good, so the message is doomed to fail. Using social media, caring about social media, putting time into social media, it's all the enemy of manhood. Now, this is a woman, and I don't know if she would be the expert of manhood. And also, that's just like the whole thing. It's like, I want to sound smart, and I've heard of Marshall McLuhan. I've heard the medium is the message, so I'm just going to include this in here. And it's not going to have any relevance to the piece or really even relevance to what McLuhan said. But I'm just going to put that in here to sound smart. And it's like the way it's put it is just so ham-fisted and stupid. But anyway, she goes on to her case. This is an article that, as I wrote on Twitter, is like, this article has been written countless times ever since I've been involved in like politics or professionally since like 2013. Is like basically this frumpy 20-something girl writes this article, and essentially the underlying message is like, why won't a good man marry me or take me out and do this, and like, where's my dream man? And then she just complains about men, and in 2013 and 2014 it would have been like, oh, they're all busy playing video games, stop playing video games. And now her article is like, they're busy tweeting instead of taking me out on a date. And they're just like so mad, and it's like it's just like ultimate like negging and shit. It's like so stupid. It's like, and if you look this girl up, I don't want to be too mean, but I don't want to say this girl is not in a position to demand her ideal man. And I've talked, and I've known several like conservative girls who are like this. And they imagine that they deserve like the ideal man. And the ideal man is like this dude who's like an ex-veteran, who's also super wealthy. He's like a corporate lawyer too. And he's really country, and he like drives like a really nice pickup truck, and he's like driving around DC, and he wears like a cowboy hat and cowboy boots, and he wears that coming back from his corporate law job where he makes six figures, and they just love that he was like a former army sniper, and he's just like a badass. And then he just like shows up to pick up this frumpy girl who's got a terrible personality, a long jawline, and like is like slightly overweight, and he's like, come on in, honey, go ride with me in my pickup truck, we're going fishing. And they go, and it's like the dream date of her time, and it's like, I want to build this big beautiful house just for you, honey, and we're gonna have all these kids. And they're like, why aren't men like this? And it's like, you probably have a little bit unrealistic expectations here, especially when you're dealing with DC. And you're generally not worth like the high status men either, because like you've got a terrible personality. You're not necessarily the hottest of the bunch, and they could just go for someone else. And so it's like a mix of and this is not just really a problem with all conservative women. I think this is like a problem with particularly millennial women. I don't know, Zoomer women seem to have all their own problems, but I know it's unrealistic expectations that they're imagining, and they like demand we deserve this. And due to the like men in conservative Inc. who run a lot of these publications and these organizations, they're just like total simps, and they're like, oh, you totally deserve the best. Like, I can't believe like Matthew McConaughey hasn't shown up to propose to you, or Scott Eastwood. Like, where are these men proposing to you? And that's who they imagine like is like that there should be their man. And it's like, no, it's not. And so these articles are just so stupid when they come out. And I mean, the terminology is like her just like saying like, oh, you shouldn't be posting anything, you just need to be focused on like your family. And this article is published on an online website, and people were promoting it on Twitter. And like the people are like saying it as like other men frequently post, but I guess they're manly when they post on Twitter, and others aren't. And it's like, you shouldn't be dunking on people, you should just be a Luddite, just serving your wife who is not worth serving. And you or is not worth like the type of attention and desire or the high status man that she desires. And that should be your whole life, is just like it's like imagining that the man should be like a wife. It's like the opposite of like these tribe men are like, women just need to log off and be in the kitchen. Instead, the man needs to log off and be in the forest cutting wood for the family. And it's like, okay, maybe, I mean, you should probably do that occasionally, but it's also like you're also online posting, and he is as well. And this is how we interact with the world today. And I don't think, posting, I think, is actually very masculine. I think, women always want you to log off because they know that men have a lot of power on here, and they're able to connect with their friends and have a lot of fun. And they want to take our fun away. They want to take our joy away of posting and of, hanging out with our friends online. And they want to take that away. Anything that like space for male escape, they want to eliminate. It's whether it's video games or Twitter or like sports or anything. Everything should just needs to be like focused on your family. And it's like a time-honored joke of like men always like, oh, it's time for me to escape the old ball and chain. I've had enough of my wife and kids. Like, I'm taking a break to like go hunting or something. And like this is how like a lot of men function. I know several guys who are like happy fathers and husbands online who still post, and it's like their way of like, first off, interacting with the world and gathering news and information and connecting with interesting people, but it's also their way of like, escaping from the, like life's, the mundane aspects of life, and it's like the drudgery. And instead, they're like, women just like, why are you playing a video game? You shouldn't be playing a video game. You need to be focused on me right now. Like, everything should be focused on you. That's real manlyhood. John Wayne wouldn't be on Bumble. That's another like funny line from this article. Is that she like complains about it, like all these men, like, I go to a bar and no man comes up and talks to me. I was like, well, that might not be a problem with men. That might be a you problem. But they always like complain about like there's these gorgeous women and none of these men will talk to them. And it's like, well, whatever. Maybe they're doing their own thing, or maybe they don't want to come up and talk to you. Maybe that's the real reason. But then she's like complaining about how men don't talk to women. And then she complains how like John Wayne wouldn't download Bumble to talk to women. And it's like, okay, so you say men need to talk to women more, and then the men get this app to talk to women, but you complain about that because really what they should be doing is seeing you at a bar and all surrounding you and demanding your affections and attention. But so it's once again, these are, as I said on Twitter, this is like femcel diatribe. If a man had written this and had complained that like none of these hot women are coming up and talking to him, and do you imagine if, Audrey Hepburn would be on Bumble? No, she wouldn't be. People would be like, this is an incel article. This is like a man who's like really deeply insecure about like not getting women. And so he's just like lashing out and writing this whole like social analysis and like demanding this and this like full of woman hatred. And it's like, yeah, people would just say it's an incel article. So this is just a femcel article, and you guys should not stop posting. It's how we make our name known. It's actually incredibly masculine. So just pump some weight. Send out a tweet, send out a Giga Chat and meme. You're just having fun with your friends, and women want to take that away and just put a ball and chain on you and sit you at home, and all you're doing is focusing on what your woman tells you. It's time to break free and time to post. You can still play video games in moderation. So, yeah. But yeah, these, in concluding remarks, these articles have been around forever. I don't know why it's particularly conservative. I actually know why it's a particularly conservative phenomenon. It's a combination of all these women who believe that who deserve like Scott Eastwood or Matthew McConaughey, and this is like enabled and encouraged by these conservative simps who run these websites and organizations. And it's a bad combination. So we're going to continue to see these articles, but they're always going to agitate me, and I will maybe sometimes analyze them for highly respected if they're really bad. This may have been the worst of the bunch, so that's why I picked it out. So this next segment is something pretty different. I was listening to the radio the other day, and I was hearing, a foreign correspondent reporting from Israel. And I was like, what would be really good for highly respected is if we had our own foreign correspondent. And, our production team managed to find some guy from the United Kingdom who's got a great record of reporting on the field. And I want to introduce you to Liam Strumpett. He filed a riveting report from the Gaza Strip, and it's now going to be heard for the first time exclusively on Highly Respected. So I hope listeners enjoy. Gaza Strip, Palestine. Rockets fly down on a defenseless people as they struggle for their liberation. You just heard the screams of 20,000 people losing their lives and homes. As the daily oppression grows, more people struggle and demand retribution against the Israeli state. We struggle so much to find food and comfort, and yet the Israelis rain rockets down on us. We just have no hope for life. You just heard from Muhammad, who is a struggling shoe salesman who is thinking about joining Hamas and is tired of living in absolute poverty. He wants peace and prosperity, but he believes that Israel offers neither. Israel announced this week that it had agreed to a tenuous ceasefire with the Palestinian authorities. Whether it will last tonight is anyone's guess, but for Muhammad, the struggling shoe salesman, life just goes on, and it only gets worse. As the Palestinians clear out the rubble and pile up the bodies, they all wonder, will peace ever be restored? Will there ever be peace in the Middle East? This is Liam Strumpett, highly respected foreign correspondent. Wow, that was a really riveting, powerful account from Mr. Strumpett. So, this is a trial basis, highly respected. We're looking at different options here. But, if listeners really liked Liam Strumpett, we have the budget to send him throughout the world to the hottest danger zones to, have him deliver original reporting to our listeners. Yep. I mean, it's incredible that Highly Respected has this opportunity, but listeners, if you like the foreign correspondent segment, we can send them elsewhere. Ukraine's a hot zone as well. Things going down in Africa, we can have them anywhere. So that's just something to keep in mind. Now we can finally move on to our Patron questions. And as a reminder, even though actually at the end of the show, I'm going to, there'll be a new option for people who want to support Highly Respected. But for now, if you want the power to ask me or a guest questions or suggest topics or guests, you can sign up for the Patron option at Highly Respected's Patreon. This question comes from Tony. He asks, Scott, what do you think of the Bill Gates situation and how the media has subtly turned on him? This is an excellent question because I've actually been really, amused by what's happening with Bill Gates. I mean, this guy could have done no wrong for the last year or so. And they were continually pushing him out there to promote vaccines and the COVID response and how we're going to deal with these crises and everything. And he's like a big time philanthropist. And we're all supposed to love Bill Gates. And he was like the point man, as I was saying, for the vaccine and the COVID response. And at the time that they're demanding everyone get vaxxed or stay masked, as they say, you got to get vaxxed so you can walk around maskless, even though I can report people are still walking around maskless, and I guarantee you that they're vaxxed. So it's a funny thing. I think most of the people who don't want to wear masks are the same people who don't want to get vaxxed. But that's a story for another time. But with this Bill Gates situation, he is getting raked over the coals in the press, and they're using the worst things about him. It's like this guy, was a philanderer. He hung out with Jeffrey Epstein, and we don't know what he did there. He could have done terrible things there. He could have had sex with those girls and women that Epstein brought to his island. You just don't know what's going. I mean, they're strongly implying that, and all this opposition research is coming from his wife, who shares the same, image and, organization with him. And she's just going on the war path against her husband. It's like a messy divorce that they're having in many regards. And this is happening to the richest man in the world. And Yeah, I mean, they're totally turning the switch on him, and now they're all like, "Oh, we've always hated Bill Gates. Bill Gates is terrible. Like he's a possible pedophile and an adulterer." And even like the cases they're using, I mean, they're trying to use the Me Too playbook against Bill Gates, but he's such a dork that they can't even really use these arguments against him. Like, there's some old case of from Microsoft where he apparently started a relationship with like an employee, and they're trying to make it sound like Me Too-ish, but it's clearly not Me Too-ish. Like, he went through all the proper channels. Like, he asked her out on a date. He wasn't like saying like, "Hey, nice ass," like smack her on the ass or anything. He wasn't doing anything like they usually, try to use for these Me Too cases. And apparently she accepted, and they had a consensual relationship. I mean, yeah, there's clearly something wrong with adultery, but not necessarily like the end of the world, but they're using these type of events to like to tarnish him as a bad man. Now, I'm not necessarily crying for Bill Gates. I think Bill Gates has had a lot of negative influence over the world, but I do find it interesting that these people, these liberal icons, these heroes they use to promote their image, they then just completely turn on them on a dime. No like awareness of how they were treating Bill Gates just like a few months ago, really even just a few weeks ago. And it is remarkable the power that the media has to do this, like completely destroy somebody that they had previously admired. And I think the best example of this is Governor Andrew Cuomo. Like last year, this guy was the hero. Like, they were enthralled with him. They were even using terms like Cuomo-sexual because they were so enamored with Cuomo's leadership and his tough guy resolve in the face of of COVID. And we wish that Cuomo was our president instead of Trump and the Orange Man. But it's all gone awry due to the same thing that's going on with Bill Gates. It's like these Me Too accusations. And once again, it's like, it's not necessarily the type of stuff that was lobbed at Harvey Weinstein, where it's like clearly like these situations like were either rape or borderline rape, and or just like entirely creepy behavior, such as like one time like Harvey Weinstein like pulled some woman aside and like jerked off into a potted plant in front of this woman that he had just met. Lots of like gross shit like that. Like, here it's just like Cuomo going up to a staffer and be like, "Hey, you look good today," and like, or like trying to like, I mean, some of it is uncomfortable, like him like grabbing, like, "I want to give a kiss." Maybe you don't want to do that. It's like kind of like odd behavior, and it's like stuff that like you would have gotten a talking to, whatever, and depending on your place in the company, you would have been talking to. But like as like criminal behavior, not really. But they turned him overnight from this great hero of COVID who we wanted to buy his book and all these things like we love Cuomo, into the worst villain in history due to the fact that he like could be accused of Me Too. So Me Too is like really, and even when the original like targets of Me Too, like Harvey Weinstein and all these others, these are big major liberal figures, like important parts to the system that they're building, and their political infrastructure that they have. And they'll just turn on him. And some of them, I think with Cuomo, they use this as a reason because they realized how embarrassing it was that they made him out to be a hero of COVID when he was sending sick people to die, or not sick people to die, but sick people with COVID into these nursing homes where they wiped out like the entire nursing homes. And like, there was no criticism of that. It's a conspiracy theory. And even a lot of people who like turned on Cuomo were defending that behavior as like, oh, well, what harm is that? But now they're like, it's outrageous how he gave that woman a long hug without asking permission. And this is now the type of standard that we have. And they're using the same thing against Bill Gates. They're not questioning any of his dubious practices that are experiments that he wants, or like the fact that he wants us all drinking poop water and taking strange vaccines and like moving on to like stop eating meat, etc. What is he doing down in Africa? Like, none of those things are coming out. It's like the fact that this dude was like possibly cheated on his wife with both, and the wife cheated. Melinda Gates apparently also cheated on him. I mean, they had an open marriage, but it's now worse that he did that, while like Melinda Gates like cheating on her husband, like, you go girl, power to you, while like Bill Gates, it's a crime against humanity. And so they're able to do this. And I think, and the way people accept this is astounding. I mean, people always like imagine that people have a long term memory. Like they have a very short term memory, and they don't have awareness of what they say. So, like the same media outlets that were crowning Andrew Cuomo the best leader in America are the same ones who are denouncing him as like a rapist and an awful human being. And like we've never liked Andrew Cuomo. It's the same happening with Bill Gates. So these people can be unpersoned very easily. With thanks to the power of the media and the short-term memory of the herd, and that's a very powerful thing. And I think a lot of Americans don't want to believe that because they're like, oh well, they always wonder. It's like, oh well, how could the Soviet people just so easily believe that this person who is like best friends with Stalin is now a traitor and an enemy to the state? Well, you can see that now taken in case with people like Cuomo and Bill Gates, not to the same extent, but that they can use the same power. So you could see, they could turn this same power against Joe Biden if they wanted to. This same president you would have said who's restoring civility and normalcy, 1 month, and he's the best president we've ever had. The next month they could say that he is an enemy of the state and a traitor, and these same people would immediately switch their opinion overnight. And Stalin was able to do this, and so have other totalitarian governments have done it, and Americans are no different. We like to think that we have a long-term memory. It's the same. We like read 1984, and we're like, oh, we would never let, that thing go down the memory hole. Well, we do, and we do it all the time, and it's something that, these cases remind us of, and, we're now seeing this power take place. Now, why are they turning so hard on Bill Gates? That's a little difficult. I mean, maybe there's something like people higher up are like, we're tired of Bill Gates. Like he's too much of a liability. I think they said they did that with Harvey Weinstein. They certainly did that with Cuomo. They did that with these other people. And like, we're done with him, whatever, move on. But I think it really does undermine the COVID effort. If you're like, the guy who's telling us to have vaccines, it was best friends with Jeffrey Epstein and went to his island all the time. What? Isn't that a little weird? And like the people have to, and the elites have to know that this is like a little off-putting. I think the more cases that just Melinda Gates is just driven by such female hatred for her husband for whatever reason, and she's just like thrown like whatever like larger picture out of the works, and just like wants to go to war with Bill Gates and take most of his money and then be replaced as the central philanthropist, and that Bill Gates is so ruined that he will like give over the foundation to her, and now she can be like loved by the media and just the central figure in all these things. I think that might be a better case for the scenario, but I think, and it's also in that matter that the elites don't have a loyalty system. Like they have no honor. They don't care about supporting people unless it's they feel that they'll lose something by this person going away, and they don't have anything to lose by throwing off Bill Gates, even though he's the wealthiest man in the world. So something to keep in mind. It's an interesting thing to happen. So those are my thoughts on the case. I'll, of course, keep an eye on it. Maybe we could, even if it involves any foreign affairs, we may have to send out Liam Strumpett to cover it. So that's it for the topics for Highly Respected this week. But I want to announce the brand new project. And the project is we're going to start hosting Highly Respected episodes on Substack next week. Now, we'll have to see how long this lasts. Like, I could be kicked off, but Substack has like to say that they stand up for free speech. So we're going to test that next week. And we're going to have, bonus episodes on Highly Respected. You will have to sign up and subscribe to it. As it is, if I'm going to give the good people what they want, I have to, be a little bit rewarded for all the hard work I have for talking in the microphone. But most of these bonus episodes that will happen, of course, we'll have the major episodes still be posted on YouTube. Anyone can listen to it. We'll just have the bonus episodes behind a paywall on Substack. It's the best format. I've thought about using with Patreon, but I think Patreon would kick me off as soon as they realize I'm on Patreon. And Subscribestar, I'm having problems setting that up. So we'll use Substack for now. I think it'll be good. And Substack's a big platform, and you can reach a lot more people. I may post some writings on there, and I'll try to put up a newsletter to say like things I'm doing this week, which will probably just be the episodes of Highly Respected. But the bonus episodes will usually focus on most likely like book reviews, music reviews, culture. It'll be like an additional 40 minute episode of me talking about one topic. It could be just some topic that I didn't get to cover on the show, or I felt it was like a little bit different for the show's tone. But it'll probably mostly be book reviews of just things I'm reading and talking about and discussing it and putting it on a current focus. Most of the books will be history or current affairs stuff. It could also be movies. So it'll be, a little bit, a slightly different format from Highly Respected, but it will have yours truly, your favorite voice, your favorite commentator talking about it. So you should expect the first episode sometime next week. I do have a Highly Respected Substack already set up. I think you can follow it now. I haven't posted anything there, but I will share a link to this on Twitter for you guys to follow. So with that, lots of things to come up for. Look forward to the next episode. But until next time, stay respected.